Hey, what's up, Facebook? Let me see if this is working. I think it is. Um, Welcome. Thanks for joining me. If, of course, this is working, let me see. Oh, yeah, there it is. I am live on the Facebook. That's what's up. Now, let me go ahead and go live on the gram. Uh, Welcome, welcome. Hey, we are going to talk about creation and evolution. Our church is in this series. And I'm trying to figure out this technology stuff. I should probably know it, but here we go. Oh, I think I got it. Let's see. Let me set up the gram. We're in this series right now called Questions You Don't Ask in Church. And this past Sunday, we started, yes, I'm live on the gram. I'm live on Facebook. Come on, somebody. Yeah, we're in the midst of this series. We just started it, actually. Questions You Don't Ask in Church. And what we did for this series was we invited you to shape this series. We sent out a survey asking you, hey, what are the questions that you have that you want to ask in church, but you don't. So you gave us a bunch of questions that you had, asking or telling us, hey, here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to find out. And we picked the top 3 to come up with sermon content. This Sunday coming up, it's our second week of the series. We're going to answer the question, am I really a Christian or am I going to hell? So we're going to answer that this Sunday coming up. And then the following Sunday, the third week of this series, we're going to answer the top most asked question that you had, which is, what does God think about LGBTQIA plus and pronouns? And so we're going to answer that. I think I'm going to be sick that weekend, though, so I don't know. But we're gonna answer that. But this past Sunday, we started off the series asking the question, which is it? Is it evolution or creation? And does it matter? Yeah, and so I talked about evolution and creation, and there was so much content I wasn't able to get to everything that I wanted to share. So we wanted to do this live stream to answer some more questions that you have, and then also just give more information on that. So if you have questions about creation and evolution that we didn't get a chance to hit on Sunday, submit that in the comments on Instagram or also Facebook, and I will do my best to also look at those comments and see what you ask. So let me, as I'm saying that, I'm realizing I don't have our Facebook page up so that I can look. I'm using like a third-party streaming for this, but I'm gonna pull that up and see if we can't see questions that come in live. But I do see Dave has joined us. Dave Scott, Irene Davis, the one and only, the lovely Irene Davis at irenedavis.com. And then see Jeremy shared this. And then I'm not able to see on Facebook, I think, who is watching right now. But you can put your comments in Facebook, and I can see it. Man, whew, I need like a technician helper to do all this. But thanks for joining me live on your lunch break, and want to give you some more stuff on creation and evolution, and again, answer any questions that you have. So if you're joining me on Facebook, be sure to say hey, and yeah, we'll go from there. So this right here is Facebook. This right here is Instagram. So here we go. So we talked about evolution and creation. I believe in the creation story. What we said this past Sunday. And by the way, if you miss any of the sermon from this past Sunday, you can go and listen to it on our podcast. You can find it. This is journey.church. You can listen to it live on our, or you can listen to it on our page there. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And there's that. Let's see. Oh, Jeremy, I see you asked a question. Tori, I see you joined in. Great. Okay, this is working. Dave, he said he has both screens on so he can hop in the video if need to ask questions, chats. I don't even know what that means, Dave. If I'm gonna like bring you in on it, I don't know. Jeremy, you're asking a bunch of questions not about evolution and creation. We will definitely get to those in our 4th week, though. And I'm going to go live with you, Dave, to bring you on Instagram. But Jeremy, you're asking some questions that aren't about evolution and creation. I'm going to focus on evolution and creation here. And Dave has joined us. What's up, Dave?
This is what that means. This means I can look at the chats and give you the questions.
Okay, gotcha.
Couldn't see them.
Nice, right on. And then, but any questions that you ask not about evolution or creation, we're going to add into our 4th week of the series, which is going to be a hodgepodge of all kinds of different questions. So let's dive into some evolution creation stuff. So this past Sunday, I talked about how evolution and creation really are stories about our origin, how we came to be. And that's exactly what they are, stories, because none of us were there in the very beginning. And so we don't know. We can look at evidence. We can look at things that we see on our planet and in the universe. But then the question is, based on what we see, what do we do with that? Is that like how did we get here? And from the evidence that we see, we come up with ideas and thoughts and theories. And the 2 predominant stories are evolution or creation. And the story that I believe is the story of creation. What I said this past Sunday, I'm not going to rehash it all, is that really creation gives us purpose. It gives us meaning. Evolution really just says we're accidents who just happen to be here. And so there's no real greater purpose. It's just survival of the fittest, get whatever you can, and be the dominant one to win out. But I believe that the story of creation gives hope and meaning and purpose. And that's why I choose to believe that, not only for those reasons, but also Jesus believed that creation was real. And I think the evidence points to creation. So we also said that evolution is not science, because science is something that can be reproduced. It can be something that can be experimented on, and we can't reproduce macroevolution or our origin. And I mentioned too that none of this is against science. Science is a good thing. God created science, and I believe He created a world and a universe to operate in the realm of science and the laws of science. So this really is about.
Question.
Yeah.
So, how did dinosaurs fit into creation? Why weren't they mentioned in Scripture?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so we'll get into dinosaurs in a bit, and then where they're brought up in Scripture. That's good. So actually, we'll dive right in. So what we see in creation is that God created the world in 6 days, and He rested on the 7th. And if we believe that God is all powerful, all knowing, almighty, He can do anything and everything, Him creating the world in 6 days is not a problem for Him to do at all. He can simply speak it into existence, which is what the scriptures say He does. And that's called ex nihilo. God creates something from nothing. So there was nothing. God speaks it into existence, and now there's something. On the first day, God says, "Let there be light," and so He separates darkness from light. On the second day, God says, "Let there be a vault in the sky to separate water from water." Remember that. We're going to come back to that later. On the third day, God creates dry ground and plants. On the fourth day, God creates sun, moon, stars, solar systems, galaxies, planets, all that. On the fifth day, God creates sea creatures and birds. And then on the sixth day, God creates land animals. And then He stops and creates humanity. He creates a man in His own image. Now, for everything that God creates, He speaks it into existence. But then when God creates a man, He molds him from the dust of the ground. He doesn't speak man into existence. He molds him from the dust of the ground. So he gets dirty. He gets his hands dirty when he creates humanity, and he creates us in his image. And then he breathes his breath into the man's lungs to give him life. And so, man, humanity, people are not animals like the rest of the animal kingdom. We weren't spoken into existence. That God took his time on us, molding us in his image, and then breathing his breath into our lungs. And so that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. You are not an animal. You are a person made in God's image with God's breath in you. You have a soul, whereas other animals don't. And I said other animals, but you're not an animal. But animals don't have souls, and this answers the question, Jeremy, I think you asked before, but some people ask, don't all dogs go to heaven? What we see in the scriptures is that there are animals in heaven, but they most likely are not the animals that we have here on earth. When your pet ferret dies because it does not have a soul, it most likely will not be in heaven. It is an animal. But there are animals in heaven. So will your animal be in heaven? Scriptures don't seem to indicate that they will be because they don't have a soul like people do. But there are animals in heaven. So I don't know if that encourages you. But let's see. So we got, I see Spartan 2:4. There's nothing in fossil record of the transitional forms. If we evolved, that's where it falls apart. Yeah, that's right. And so we talked about that on Sunday as well, transitional fossils. Let's talk about, yeah, so we're going to get into dinosaurs. Why they aren't mentioned in scriptures, they actually are. I'm going to show you that. But I want to talk about carbon dating and then fossil layers, and then the flood and transitional fossils and creation and all of that. So Dave left me. He's on a phone call, but he's still here. Got it. All right. So carbon dating. Um, Here's what creation says. If we ascribe to creation from the scriptures, creation, if that's true, then it means that our world is about 7,000 years old, 6,000 years old, 7 or 6,000 years old. Because what creation says is that God created all things, spoke it into existence. He creates Adam, and from Adam we can trace the lineage all the way from Adam to Jesus. Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, and when you trace the lineage, what you see is there's about 4,000 years between Adam and Jesus, um, maybe 5,000 years. So that means that this world is about 7 to 6,000 years old. That's a young Earth theory. There are some who believe that the Earth is millions of years old, and so the time between the world being formless and void, and then God creating all things in Genesis chapter 1 says, "In the beginning was in the beginning was uh, in the beginning." God, oh my goodness, why am I blanking on this? I'm thinking about John chapter 1 verse 1 that says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. So some people say, yeah, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and that period was millions and millions and millions and millions of years ago, until God created light, speaking it into existence, and that happened 6 or 7 thousand years ago. I don't know. But what we see is that from creation, the creation account means our world is about 7 to 6,000 years old. And that's not what we're taught in science class. What we're taught is that our world is billions of years old. But I think it could be young. I think it could be 7 or 6,000 years old. And so let's talk about carbon dating. What happens in carbon dating? Here, I'll just read this. Carbon dating is a method that we use to measure how old something is. And the way carbon dating works is we say, This element, whatever it is we're testing, has so much carbon-14 in it. And what happens is, as time goes on, carbon-14, um, it loses part of that carbon-14. And so it takes 5,730 years for the original amount of carbon to be reduced by half. This is called a half-life. It takes another 5,730 years for it to lose another half of the carbon. So every 5,730 years, the carbon contents in an element is reduced by half. Now, if we know how much carbon-14 something had in it once it died, then we could just measure how much carbon it currently has and subtract it by the half-lives to see how old it is. So we do this with fossils. When you hear that a fossil is billions or millions of years old, that's how they get this number. They say, we measured the half-lives, the carbon half-lives, and that's where it got us to this number, this age. But in order for that to work, we need to know how much carbon was in it at first. And so there's some circular reasoning here, because scientists approach carbon dating with an assumption that evolution is true and that the Earth is billions of years old. So when they go about this process, they assume that the fossil that they have is already millions and millions of years old. Carbon dating doesn't get us that far back, so there's an assumption when approaching a fossil or an element that it's already millions of years old. And so that's read into the data of carbon dating. And the other thing with carbon dating is we don't know how much carbon was in the atmosphere years and years and years ago. We're making a guess on how much carbon we think was in the atmosphere, and how much carbon was in the atmosphere at that time that thing could have absorbed. Might have been a lot different, and might have been less than our atmosphere today, because what we're making an assumption on is that there's as much carbon in the atmosphere now as there were back then. But I think that carbon might have been different, and it could have been different given the flood. So we'll talk about the flood in a minute. But when looking at how old something is, scientists who believe in evolutionary theory make an assumption that the thing is millions of years old because evolution says it's millions of years old. And that's circular reasoning. Because the thing I believe says it's millions of years old, I read that into the data that I see. I'm not an expert on carbon dating, but this is just like a glossing over of how it works. And there have been times where carbon dating has been done on various elements and various animals that are not that old, but the carbon dating said it was that old based on the assumptions that were given. And so you can look into this some more. And I'd encourage you to look more into carbon dating if that's something that really excites you or gets you excited. But I want to talk about fossil layers. And here's some interesting research. According to Dr. Donald Burge, the curator of vertebrate paleontology at the College of Eastern Utah Prehistoric Museum, he said mammal fossils are found in nearly every dinosaur dig that he's ever been associated with. He said mammal fossils are found in nearly every dinosaur dig that he's ever been associated with. Again, remember what we've learned in with evolutionary theory and in school is that there's dinosaurs and then later come the mammals. He said this: we find mammals in almost all of our dinosaur dig sites. So they're in the same layer, right there, the same site. We have about 20,000 pounds of bentonite clay that has mammal fossils that we are trying to give away to some researcher. It's not that they're not important, it's just that you only live once, and I specialize in something other than mammals. I specialize in reptiles and dinosaurs. So Dr. Birch, who by the way is an evolutionist, said, yeah, when we are digging for dinosaurs and finding dinosaur bones, we're also finding mammal fossils. That shouldn't be the case given evolutionary theory, but given creation, it makes sense. Because on the sixth day, God created all land animals. That includes dinosaurs. Jeremy asked about uh, dinosaurs in the scriptures. There's actually references in the book of Job to some creatures that seem like dinosaurs. The Leviathan is one of them. Um, and I don't have my man. I should have got my Bible to like read this stuff. You see how unprepared I am on this. I was trying to figure out all the technology here. But if you read in Job, you see some. Let me just look that up now over here, so we can see some of what Job writes. You got the Leviathan and the Behemoth. Yeah. Let me see. It might actually be quicker if I get my like paper Bible. Yeah, Job chapter 41. Says, can you pull a leviathan with a fish hook or tie down the tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its hide with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from its mouth. Hey, you know what this sounds like? A dragon. I know. Oh my goodness, we just ventured into the realm of mythology, but what's being described here is not like some commentators say, oh, this is the hippo, or this is like uh, um, a alligator or crocodile, but it says, I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and graceful form. Like crocodiles don't have like really strong, graceful limbs. We see fire coming out. I think it mentions like a tail here, and hippos have like a small little tail. But so check out the description of Leviathan and be like, man, what kind of creature is that? It seems to describe a dragon. Dragons aren't real. There's all kinds of things that we're discovering on this earth that we didn't know. Like, and there's just some crazy things like on this planet. Uh, some that we see and know, like there's bioluminescence. There's like bodies of water where you go and swim in them and they light up at night and it just seems magical, right? Like who would have thought? But that's a real thing. There are creatures like in the depths of the sea. If you look at some of those pictures, it's like, oh my goodness, yeah. And just to think the creativity that God had in creating this world. Yeah, all that's possible, and it's stuff that'll blow your mind, like stuff that is real that you can see, and it's like, what? And so yeah, why couldn't a dragon be real? I mean, this seems to be described here. Yeah, so there's a thing. And then yeah, check out the behemoth too. But I think that's where we see some mentions of dinosaurs in the scriptures. Um, yeah. So let's see. Fossils. Mammals being found in dinosaur. I'm gonna share this. I'm gonna bring Dave back on. Mammals being found in dinosaur layers, and that shouldn't be the case if evolution is a real thing. Let's see. A whole host of modern day creatures have been found in dinosaur rock layers. The following is an excerpt from the article by Calvin Smith. He says this: to the surprise of many, ducks, one squirrel, ducks, squirrels, platypus, beaver-like, and badger-like creatures have all been found in dinosaur-era rock layers, along with bees, cockroaches, frogs, and pine trees. Most people don't picture a T-Rex walking along with a duck flying overhead, but that's what the so-called dino-era fossils prove. In fact, a total of 432 different mammal species have been identified in rock layers containing dinosaurs. So, does it mean that mammals have been around for tens of millions of years? No. What it would mean is that the way evolutionists have been dating the dinosaurs is fundamentally flawed. Most people do not realize this, but T Rex bones have actually been discovered that still contain soft tissue inside of them. If those bones truly were millions of years old, that would be impossible. And carbon dating also provides strong evidence that the evolutionary timeline is seriously messed up. Due to the rate that it decays, there should be absolutely no measurable radioactive carbon left in any fossils that are greater than 100,000 years old. But we find it in all the ancient fossils that we dig up that get tested. We even find it in coal, natural gas, diamonds, and in dinosaur bones. So there's some thoughts on fossil layers. Um, Earlier was mentioned about transitional fossils, and I talked about this on Sunday morning. But evolution says that evolution took place over millions and millions of years, and that over those millions of years, one species transitioned to another. And so throughout, we should have millions and millions of transitional fossils. Um, and I touched on this Sunday, but we should see millions of transitional fossils, especially when it comes from us evolving from monkeys. And the question is, where are the monkey people? We don't see it in the fossil record. And if evolution is a thing that continues on now, like, or did it stop? Like, did macroevolution stop? It should still be going on now, right? If that's the case, where are the monkey people now? Like, why don't we see monkey people walking around? Why don't we see um, horse giraffes walking around? Why don't we see, I mean, all these, I mean, and there's so many species of animals. There should be tons and tons and tons of transitional fossils in the fossil record, and even now, because again, this took place over millions and millions of years, so there should be millions and millions of transitional fossils, but we just don't see that. And creation would let us know why. It's because God created everything in its own kind. Now we do see microevolution, but microevolution is a change within a species that makes that species still that species. So a dog is still a dog, a horse is still a horse, and a monkey is still a monkey. A bird is still a bird, even though its beak might grow a little bit or change a little bit over time because it's passing on genes that are more dominant that help it survive. And so there's that, but that's microevolution, and that's survival of the fittest. That makes sense. So, but we don't really see macroevolution in the fossil record or walking around today. So, man, one thing that I'm that I didn't get a chance to talk about, but I think makes sense and really helps connect all of it is the flood. the flood really ties all this in and helps the story of creation ring even more true for me. So what we see is in creation, God creates all things by speaking it into existence. On day 2, I want you to read it in Genesis chapter 1. On day 2, God creates a vault that he calls sky, and it says that it separates water from water. And so the earth was formless and void. God's spirit hovers over the waters of the deep. On day 2, he creates the sky to separate water from water. And so there's water on the earth, but water from water. There's a layer of water, according to Genesis chapter 1, that is above the earth, and it's separated by sky. And so the idea, the picture is that when God creates all things, he creates the world, and above the sky is this layer of water. And this layer of water would create a different atmosphere and environment than what we see now. Um, and so you go to another planet and there's a different atmosphere there based on the makeup of the, what's there, the gases and all this stuff. And um, so when God creates this layer of water, the sky separating water from water, there's a layer of water up above that would create a different atmosphere here on earth than what we have today. Now that layer of water isn't there anymore. What happened? It's the flood. When you read the flood account in Genesis, what you see is that this layer of water comes down. Um, Now, before the flood, some bizarre things that you read are that people are living for hundreds and hundreds of years. Methuselah, the oldest man to ever live, was 969 years old. And that seems far fetched because we don't see that. How do people live so long? Here's how: there's a layer of water up above the sky, and it creates a different environment, a different atmosphere that enable people to live longer. Also, at this time, according to creation, all the plants and animals are living, and there's dinosaurs living then too. And then uh, God causes the flood because humanity has become so evil. He regrets what he did. So Noah, over hundreds of years, builds this ark. Him and his family go in. God brings all the animals to him, 2 by 2, and then the clean animals, he brings, I think, 7 pairs to him. They get in this ark, and then the layer of water that's up above is released. The whole earth floods. This also explains Pangea. So we can look and say, okay, yeah, Pangea seems to be a real thing. If you piece together all the continents, it seems to make one big piece. So it would appear that before the flood, there's Pangea, this one massive land. A destructive, chaotic, violent flood takes place. And during that time of just under, or just about a half a year, because it rains 40 days and 40 nights, but the earth is still covered in water for longer than that. And then when it all dissipates and dissolves, when the ark lands, it's a very different earth. It's a different atmosphere. Pangea has been separated now. Um, During all that time, uh, things like the Grand Canyon are created. Um, uh, like fossils are made. Um, in these different layers. Again, you see mammals with dinosaurs, and there's some parts of fossils that are in crazy spots that they shouldn't be according to evolutionary timeline. I mean, all this happens in the flood. And then after the flood, what we see is that people live less and less. The reason is because the environment changes, the atmosphere changes. What happened to the dinosaurs? Well, there's this theory that a meteor hit and all this happened, but it, dinosaurs most likely were on the ark. They were part of the animals that God brings. But it's after the flood, because the environment changes, the atmosphere changes. It's not as conducive a place for them to live anymore. And so they die out because that layer of protective water isn't there anymore. The environment changes, they die out. People start to live less. They don't live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's all because this layer of water that was there on day 2 isn't there anymore. And so the flood helps explain the change in environment. The flood helps explain what happened to the dinosaurs? The flood helps explains why the Earth is the way it is. It doesn't need to take millions and millions of years for the Grand Canyon to be created. That could have happened in the flood. Um, so all sorts of things is answered through the flood. So, all right, I've gone through a bunch of stuff. I'm just gonna hit a bunch of different things. What questions do we have that we need to go over? What do we need to go into more? And I mean, we could go into like in depth all this stuff. We could read articles and all that stuff, but I only got so much time with you guys, and I don't want to bore you to death either. So I'd encourage you to look some of this stuff up as well. But what other questions do we have, Dave? That or what do you have to add to this?
No, I think all this is good. I've been posting some verse references, so if people want to follow up and look at what you're talking about,
Yeah.
then those references are there. There's another one that I don't. So I had to take a phone call. I don't know if you touched on this. I think you could touch on it with Jeremy's question. After 6 days of work, what did God do on his day off? Nap, brisk walk, hang out with his boy Adam. So some of that I think is in jest, but the idea of the wording that is used to reflect day,
Yeah.
rest, that then the Hebrew people would follow with taking a Sabbath and all that.
Right, that's really good. Man, so some people think, they say, okay, so the creation account is just a myth, it's a story, and the 6 days weren't literal days, but the 6 days were eras. And so we can believe that the earth is millions of years old, and God created the world in these 6 days that are really eons or eras or whatever. Uh, but but that's not what the scriptures say, and that's not the wording that's used, and it's not how the early Hebrews saw it. So, a few things. The word day that's used in the Old Testament is the word yom, and yom means a literal 24-hour period. And most everywhere in the scriptures, the majority of the time the word yom is used, it's a 24-hour period, unless it's talking about a figurative day out there than something like that. So like the day of judgment, that's an event, a time. Um, then it wouldn't be a 24-hour period. But every time the word yom is used, most of the time it's 24 hours. And then we also see there was evening and there was morning the first day. Or maybe there was morning and evening the first day. But we see a setting of the sun. Say it again, Dave.
I'm muted.
Yeah.
Evening first.
Yeah.
And then morning.
There's evening and
Jewish
morning.
Tradition, the day starts at night, which there's an interesting aspect of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's evening and morning the first day. Now, wait, hold on. God doesn't create the sun until the fourth day. So how is that? I would say like God is the light then on those first 3 days. But if these are eons too, what we see is that God creates plants on day 3, and then he creates the sun on day 4. If these are eons that go on, or like a long era or a long period of time, God creates plants on day 3. Plants need sun to survive, so they all would have died like a week later if a whole era has passed between God creating the plants and then creating the sun. So it makes sense in that this would be a day, because again, plants need sunlight to live. So just one day passed after God created the plants that he then creates the sun to give sunlight. We also see that Moses references creation. I think I know Jesus references creation. I'm trying to remember if he references it in the terms of Sabbath, but the idea is that, and what they say is that just as God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, they're instructed in the same way, you do your work in 6 days and then rest on the seventh day. We see that in the Ten Commandments, to observe the Sabbath and obey the Sabbath, because, and what's referenced, is because God worked on 6 days, he rested on the seventh day. If it was eras or eons that had passed during that time, it doesn't quite fit. It's not a good illustration to be used in the Ten Commandments, but because it's used in the Ten Commandments, which God wrote, because the first round of Ten Commandments God wrote with his own hand, God is making this reference to himself. I created the world in 6 days and I rested on the seventh, and I did that to set an example for you to work 6 days and then rest on the seventh. So we talked about Yom, 24 hours. There's evening and morning the first day. A whole era couldn't have passed between these days because the plants that were created would have died. They need sunlight, and the sun was created the next day, the fourth day. Plants were created the third day. And then this is also, creation is referenced as a reason why we observe Sabbath, because God worked 6 days, rested on the seventh. And what God did on the seventh day for his rest, I don't know. What else? What would you add to that, Dave?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the wording in the scripture is very intentional, and the placement of everything is very intentional. Nothing was by accident. And so, if there was a different time period that was intended, then there would have been a wording to reflect that. The creation account is written in what's called a chiasm, which is we don't have time to get into it on here, but it's a very intentional literary way of writing that the Hebrew people wrote in a lot, and it leads up to kind of the pinnacle of creation, which is mankind. And so having that like day reference, you could make the argument for all the other ones. I mean, some of the stuff is out of order, right? So having the eons of time without a sun, I don't know how you would make that argument, but I guess you could. But to make man, and then for mankind to go on eons and eons, like it just doesn't make sense. You have to do a lot of literary acrobats to really come to terms with the fact that if you believe it, that God didn't create the world in 6 days. So I think you made a lot of good points. And then some, just this doesn't really have much to do with creation, but it kind of does, right? God created us in his image, and then he sets this example of rest and how important it is to have a Sabbath. I think it's interesting that we view our days as starting in the morning and ending at night, but the way that this is written and the way that the Hebrew people would have read this and how they practiced was their day started at night, which means their day started with rest. So going into the day was starting with rest, and then you finish the day with work. So there's a lot of really interesting points in this, a lot of good stuff that you can just get out of the first 31 verses of the Bible. You'd have a whole 6-week series on just that. But I think you had a lot of good important points. I think Jeremy's keeping the comment section alive with some questions.
Man, I love it.
So penguins probably were on the ark.
Yeah, penguins were probably on the ark. Now with the ark, we just went to see the model of the ark in Kentucky, and it's awesome. It helps you see the reality of, oh yeah, this could have happened. But a couple things to keep in mind is that God brings animals to Noah, and he brings the kinds of animals. He doesn't bring every species of animal, but kinds. So it doesn't mean that there are like every single species, but like a kind. So like not all breeds of dogs would have been on the ark, but the dog kind would have been on the ark. And so and from that dog kind come all the breeds afterwards, through all the genetics that they have in them. So if you're like, man, there's this many breeds of dogs, they all had to be on the ark. No, the dog kind was there. The equine kind horses were there, and that would include mules and um, just anything horse. So knowing that not every species was on the ark, but every kind was on the ark, pares down the amount of animals that needed to be on the ark. There are some really big animals. When you think about an elephant that's fully grown, well, it could have been baby elephants that were brought on to the ark. Um, so that, oh, okay, that makes sense. And like as far as spacing goes, yeah. What about a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a Brontosaurus? If you're saying dinosaurs are on there, yeah. Again, babies could have been brought on. So we don't need massive space for these massive animals because they come in their infancy. Also, all the water animals would not have been on the ark because they're swimming in the seas. What about freshwater and saltwater? Again, the environment very well was most likely very different back then. So they could have survived. Um, So when you start to think through the possibilities of what could have happened on the ark, you begin to see that, oh yeah, this actually was really doable for every kind of animal to be on the ark. Again, not every species, not every breed, not all the intricacies of the ins and outs that we see today, but every kind of animal definitely could have fit on the ark. And been there. A question that I had previously was like, okay, we got like 9 billion people on the planet today. And if you do the math, I think every generation the population doubles. I read an article about it, and it makes sense that if the world is 7,000 years old, we'd be right at about 9 billion people, especially with it starting over with Noah and his family. We'd be right at about 9 billion people. Now, if the Earth was millions and millions and millions of years old and people lived a lot longer, like a long time ago, we'd actually have a lot more people than we have right now, more than 9 billion people. Um, so even our population and the way that the math has been done for generations and increasing, it lends itself, the math supports a 6 or 7 thousand year old Earth and the flood. So that was a question I had that was interesting for me. What else do we have?
Nothing else. Looks like we covered everything that came
Cool.
on here. So
right on.
stuff that did, so.
Hey, well, I hope that's helpful. One thing that I found is really helpful is I think Answers in Genesis is a site that's really helpful. Um, let me see. Yeah, Answers in Genesis is a helpful site. That's going to help with a lot of this stuff with creation and evolution. And it is from a Christian perspective. And so they do have an agenda to provide answers for the creation account and help you see why the creation account is plausible and possible and probable. So there is an agenda there, but there's also an agenda for evolution. And we get that in our schools. And so everybody has an agenda. But what I want to do is when I look at creation, or when I look at the world, and I look at the evidence, and I look at God's word, I don't want to say, well, God's word is wrong. But I want to say, okay, God's word is right. And so how do I how do I look at the evidence and see that it's possible and probable, and actually makes more sense? So yeah, Answers in Genesis is a great site for you to check out to get more information on some of these questions. Hey, the other thing to keep in mind too is that the Bible, the scriptures aren't a science book, right? They weren't written to be a science book. Um, they're written to tell us the story of God and the story of humanity. And so keep that in mind also. And they were also written with the best understanding of the author at the time. Um, and also sometimes from the author's perspective. Like there's this time where the sun stands still. Well, we know that the sun doesn't stand still, that um, the earth revolves around the sun. And it was thought then at that time that the sun revolved around or circled the earth. And so the sun stands still in the sky. Now, this isn't like a scientific commentary that's being made. It's just Joshua in this battle, when he looks up, he sees the sun is standing still in the sky. Um, and that's not saying, oh, see, they were so backwards and so wrong because they thought the sun revolved around the earth. No, it's just when the sun isn't moving and we can see that the sun moves across the sky. Well, it doesn't really. We know that the earth rotates and spins and the sun is hurtling through space and so is the earth and all that stuff. And we don't have to make it all complicated or anything. It's just what we see, though, from our perspective, is we see that the sun is moving across the sky, and that's not inaccurate to say that the sun moves across the sky, because it does. We can watch it move across the sky, and when it stands still, that's not inaccurate to say that it's standing still, because from what we're seeing, we see that it's standing still. So there's things again. It's true. Like the sun stood still, and we like we don't have to. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying. Like it's just something that popped in my head. Dave, how would you help me with that?
No, you're saying all the right stuff. So it's not, the scriptures are written from a scientific perspective. It's written from the perspective of people that lived during that time and knew what they knew. And there also wasn't really, any reason for God to come in and correct them,
Right.
Because that doesn't add to the story. That doesn't add to the magnificence and the glory of God. The fact is that God operates, he created science, so all these things operate within there, but God can operate inside and outside of science. And so there are some of those things where it just is a moment of miraculousness. And that people would describe it now, like, so it would be the same thing now. Like if we witness something, we would operate it in the way that we think about things now. But 100 years from now, we find out that, actually, it turns out, the sun is made of, watermelons instead of whatever it's made of now, because we found out later. Then later on, we wouldn't have been setting out the goal to be wrong. It's just here's what we saw at the time with the information that we have.
So yeah,
but change the story.
But even in this, like saying that the sun stood still is not wrong at all. It's not inaccurate, and it's not that we've learned some things now and so that's false. No, that was still true.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying, because again, if I described that the sun is moving across the sky, it is, from our perspective, it is. That is not a false statement. Now, if we're not standing on this earth and we stand from a different perspective, maybe from the sun, then we'd say, or from wherever else, we'd say, well, the sun doesn't move across the sky. Actually, and it's not even stationary. It's like hurtling through space, and we're like chasing it, and we're rotating around it, and so what we see in the scriptures is not, oh, well, now we're more advanced, or we learned a little more, and so they had it backwards. No, they were, even what was said then is still accurate and true based on that perspective and where they were standing. And that's one example with the sun. But man, well, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was worth it for anybody tuning in and watching this. Gave some added examples. Gave some more insight. So, Dave, thanks for joining me on this. This would have been even more of a train wreck if you did not join me, but you helped bring some stability and structure to this and help keep me on track a little bit. So I appreciate it.
No worries.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope y'all had a great lunch break. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Again, join us this Sunday as we answer the question, am I really a Christian or am I going to hell? So
Yeet.
that's it. All right. Take it easy, everybody.
See you there.
Now I got to figure out how to turn this off. All right. See you Facebook and YouTube.